Ah, hello, dear friends. You may or may not know that the source of all of these books that I enjoy on this channel and share with you all are the countless charity shops, or I suppose you might call them thrift stores in the US. And I pick up, there just seems to always be a constant supply of lovely historical books to pick up, coffee table books and the like. And I went into the shop of the British Art Foundation and came across this wonderful tome, The Law of Arms. Something that struck me about it were the wonderful illustrations and line drawings within. So essentially this book explores arms and armour throughout history, and I think has a look at basically how they are made, how they work. So join me in this first part for an exploration of the law of arms, the first major attempt to draw together the intricate strands that make up the history of the armour and weapons of war and the chase. We have painstakingly accurate artwork. Will make this a standard work for many years to come. So, wonderful inlay image there. The Law of Arms. Lovely illustration here. Of standards and wonderful line work. So this is what we will be exploring over the part of this book series. We've got the first early weapons, we have Roman weapons, Greek fire, catapults, knives, armour. We're going all the way up until it looks like the First or Second World War. Yes, the Second World War, the atom bomb in 1945. I mean, it's a terrifying progression of doom, isn't it? You've got the first weapons, archery and spear throwing, to the atomic bomb in 1945. It's a terrifying trajectory. So, the first chapter, a pointed yew staff rammed between the ribs of an elephant skeleton in the interglacial soil level of Lower Saxony, and another from Essex, are the earliest definitely identified weapons yet found. Both were from the Lower Paleolithic age, which began hundreds of thousands of years ago, and were just about effective enough to hold a wild animal at bay, or to wound it so that its bloodstains could be followed. However, observations of chimpanzee colonies in the wild suggest that man's first weapons were simple wooden clubs and stones. So early man shaped tools and weapon from flint by pressure flaking, or by striking the flint nodule with another hard stone. Here we have we have an example of that, an A and G. So we've got a stone out and we're just striking out a sharp weapon. Then we have the Danish flint dagger here. B. And the arrowheads from Egypt and England, made by pressure flaking. And this is the Australian Aborigine spearhead, made of bottle glass shaped by pressure flaking. This is a reconstruction of a yew longbow based on a fragment found at Mere Heath in England. It was dated by radiocarbon analysis to around 2690 BC. So the thin, flat arms of the bow are reinforced by a webbing of animal gut or sinew. It was about 75 inches or 195.5 centimeters long. A big old bow. This is a sandstone smoother for arrow shafts. The partly finished shaft was rubbed between two halves, put together like this, with a rotary motion until it was perfectly smooth, from the early Bronze Age in Glamorganshire in Wales. This is an oblique flint arrowhead that was set into a slot at the tip of the arrow shaft, fixed with resin and bound with animal gut or sinew from the Danish late Stone Age, and the flint arrowheads buried with the skeleton of a bell-beaker archer at Stanton Harcourt in England at 2000 BC. This is a bracer or a wrist guard, worn to prevent the string fouling the sleeve or striking the arm, which ranged from simple strips of bone or slate tied with sinew to plates of greenstone with gold studs and bronze buckles. So it's interesting, isn't it, the relationship between armour and weapon. Armour and arms have gone hand in hand from the very get-go, here taking on a practical necessity, as the bow would harm your clothing or harm you, and I suppose to harm your clothing in this age would be almost a bit of a death sentence, wouldn't it, if it was designed to keep you warm and safe from the elements and you didn't have much of an alternative, or you couldn't easily replicate an alternative. We're obviously very familiar with famous cave paintings like this. Mesolithic archers hunting driven deer from a rock painting in the Cueva de los Caballos, Castellón in Spain. I think in this book the writing is incredibly dense, which doesn't perhaps lend itself very well to a visual video experience. I'll prioritise the illustrations more than the text. And here we have a drawing of an Eskimo hunter with a harpoon and a spear thrower. Was almost certainly an artist's impression made after a description from Louis de Poincy, Histoire naturelle et morale, in 1658. It's quite intricate dress, isn't it? I love the tunic. Spear throwers, drawn from the sketches by Leonardo da Vinci. The lower one resembles the Roman amentum, which adds a stabilizing spin to the spear's flight. Here we have an illustration of an Australian Aborigine using a spear thrower. So it's literally like, I mean, this will sound incredibly naive to say, but it's like those things I see dog walkers with to just fling a tennis ball for a dog. It's literally like a kind of shoehorn-like device that you just fling it with, which I never actually thought would be the case. I thought you would throw this harpoon with your hand, but I suppose this gives you even greater force, doesn't it? The one here is a Mesolithic harpoon or spearhead of a stag antler found on the bed of the North Sea. It's now preserved in the Norwich Castle Museum in England. Serrated blade there, looks like it could do some damage, doesn't it? And here in E we have two carved spear throwers from an Upper Paleolithic site found near Saint-Germain-en-Laye in France. They're very ornate, aren't they? It looks like they're, we've got a gazelle or some sort of stag or deer at the time etched ornately onto the thrower. I wonder if they etched the animal it was used to hunt, so you would be able to identify which piece to use. So once man had learned to cast metal, the way was open for him to mass-produce tools in an almost infinite range of designs. The axes, spears, and swords made by Bronze Age founders were potentially much more practical than the earlier stone implements. They'd be cast with sockets to take wooden hafts, and loops could be cast onto the heads to receive retaining sinews. The cutting edges of these bronze implements could be hardened by hammering before being honed to a sharpness comparable with that of modern cutlery. A division of labour became possible. Each item no longer needed the skill of a single master to take it from flint to geode to polished axe head. Very little trimming needed after the bronze. A mixture of 9 parts copper to 1 part tin left the mould, and if the weapon broke, it was easily recast in some different older swords often include broken fragments ready to go back into the crucible. So this Bronze Age mould for casting palstaves is from Wiltshire in England, apparently cast from a clay mould, formed around a palstave and bound to it with a cord. And a multiple stone mould for casting looped spearheads here. So you could start the early days of mass production. There's a spearhead from East Anglia. Some more. A rapier found at Lissanan Island. And a palstave from a Spall in England. You've got some leaf-shaped swords here. Sword edge has been broken into small pieces so that it can be returned to the crucible for recasting. And socketed axes from the late Bronze Age, 1000 to 500 BC. We're now starting to utilise horses, a bronze horse bit from the early 1st century AD found at Middleby in Scotland. A late Bronze Age shield found at Achmaledi in Scotland, and a bronze shield from the 1st century BC taken from the Thames in London, probably gilded originally, and the embossed ornament enriched with studs of red glass is in the mature Latin style, 2 feet 6.5 inches long. Imagine pulling something like that out of the River Thames, it would be quite amazing. So man's first step towards mass production probably came with the development of a forced draft furnace to fire his pots or bake bread in batches. The same furnace could smelt the available Bronze Age ores, lead, gold, silver, and the more practical tin and copper. So once smelted, they could be cast as alloys or in a relatively pure state into a variety of forms, which the most skilled flint napper could never hope to emulate. Copper and bronze are softer than flint or basalt, but men of wildly varying ability and experience could cooperate to cast axes, sickles, spearheads, with integral sockets and thong loops, slender swords, whose tangs are already shaped to receive an applied grip. And once beyond the simplest stone axe shape, a weapon of bronze is much quicker to make than a comparable one of stone. Whereas a broken stone axe was useless, a fractured sword could be returned to the crucible and recast with little loss. This reuse of old metal has been frequently confirmed by discoveries like that made by farmers deep ploughing a field in Cambridgeshire in England. They found a 185-pound hoard of late Bronze Age tools that include weapons and decorated mounts that can be dated between 650 and 600 BC. With them were lumps of bronze that look as though they could be poured onto a flat surface after melting, and they were broken for storage or recasting. Complete swords, knives, sickles, and casting jets from the top of moulds were there too. One of the palstaves fitted exactly into part of a mould that lay amongst the bronze, and of the fragments of 14-leaf swords which might have been broken in use in at least one or more places. Hammer marks show that they are deliberately smashed into 4 or 5 inch lengths. The longest of these graceful weapons measures 29.5 inches long and is finely cut linear decoration from the point to just below the hilt. I love how it's gone from as well. We've got a way of making bread and supporting ourselves too. What killing machines can we make out of it? I suppose humanity has never lost that warmongering edge when it comes to advancing technologies, has it? Here we have the tusks of 30 or 40 boars that have been stitched to a leather cap in this reconstruction of a Mycenaean helmet, which is based on finds from the 15th century. It's all entwined together. It must have been quite effective against projectiles. But those poor boars. These swords of a type known as macara in Greece from Spain, where they're called the expadas falcatas from the 4th century BC. Quite uniquely shaped for swishing. Swish, 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 swish. This longsword is from Knossos in 1400 BC, and a bronze helmet found buried at Vilksel in Denmark as an offering to a god. Italy, or one of the Alpine countries. Got a very strikingly familiar image there of the kind of Viking or Nordic helmet. These are quite recognisable too, aren't they? So a Greek helmet of bronze, probably a later developed version of the Corinthian thorn, and a Corinthian helmet of bronze from the 7th to 6th centuries of the type worn by heavy infantry, the hoplites. In May 1960, excavations at Dendra, a few miles to the southeast of Mycenae, revealed the grave of a warrior from the end of the 15th century BC. In the corner of his tomb lay an almost complete bronze armour that testifies to the advances in metalworking technique achieved by the Mycenaeans at the dawn of metal armour manufacture. The elements of Dendra armour are little different from those being made in iron by the armourers of Central and Northern Europe 3,000 years later. The tomb also contained boar's tusks that were once fastened together on a bronze frame to make a helmet. Centuries later, a helmet of this type was described in the Iliad, a helmet of hide. On the inside it was stoutly made with many taut thongs outside the white tusks of a boar with gleaming teeth, closely arrayed, facing alternate ways, were well and cleverly set. In between a cap of felt was fitted. In his armour and helmet, with perhaps a large shield of bull's hide, the warrior may have ridden to battle in a chariot, itself a novel addition to the power of the armies in Europe. His weapons were a bronze sword about 24 inches long, and a spear hafted with olive wood. Homer also wrote in the Iliad of a form of knife or sword, known in Greece as the machaira, that uniquely shaped one we saw on the previous page, under the name falcata, a very similar sickle-shaped weapon measuring between 17 to 20 inches, with a beaked pommel, was used in the Iberian Peninsula for about 4 centuries before the beginning of the Christian era, and reached the Iberians through their contacts with the Greeks, who may first have seen it in the hands of their enemies from the 15th century. The Egyptian kopesh, so named because of its resemblance to an animal's foreleg. The Iberian form is credited with inspiring 2 alterations in the military equipment of the Roman legionaries who faced it. Polybius records that their shield rims were bound with metal to resist the falcata's slashing stroke, and a change in the method of suspending their short sword results from seeing Iberian falcata scabbards. In Seneca's De Beneficis, an old soldier testifies to the power of its cut. I do not wonder that you do not recognize me, Caesar. At the Battle of Munda, where Scipio defeated Hasdrubal in 216 BC, my eye was struck out and the bones of my skull crushed. Nor would you recognize my helmet, for it was split by a Spanish machaira. The Flisa of the Kabyle and the Yatagan of Turkey and Albania are descendants of the machaira. The Yatagan blade enjoyed a final evolution when the bayonet designers of the 19th centuries realized that its curved form allowed it to be set closer to the bore of the rifle than could a straight blade without interfering with the shot or suffering unduly from corrosive powder burns. War as we know it could not be waged until human society advanced beyond the tribal stage, and the development of the city-state itself depended on the force of armies to impose unity. When the Greeks established their battle tactics based on the phalanx, the infantry enjoyed an esteem which has never since been equalled. A free man became a hoplite, fighting in the bronze armour which was made possible by improved methods of smelting, with an elliptical shield on his left arm, a 9-foot spear in his right hand. Behind him, menial tasks were done by slaves and others who were not free. Which I suppose some of them would be like, well, I'm okay with that. You can do all the fighting on the front line, mate. We have some Babylonian slingers from the Nimrod reliefs at the British Museum. Rocks or projectiles in a rope, basically literally slingshotting it. And the early iron sword hilts from Loristan were put together like this. Looks a bit like an IKEA sketchbook, doesn't it? You've got lots of things bound together there. Then these hilts put together. slingers who appear on the reliefs from the Assyrian city of Nimrod show how their weapons were used in the 10th century BC. Their slings were probably made like one of the 800 BC from Lahoun, now preserved in the Department of Egyptology in University College London. Its linen strings are plaited by a complicated square sennet knot into a strong cord about 45 inches long with a pouch woven into its centre and a finger loop at one end. The slinger pushed his finger through the loop and held the loose end in the palm of his right hand. Then the stone was placed in the pouch and the cord drawn taut with the left. The slinger then raised his hands above his head, whirled the swing, releasing the loose end of the cord when he judged the shot to be aimed at its target. Representations of slingers in the manuscripts of the modern sling. Representations of slingers in manuscripts of the 13th century AD show slings being whirled vertically. Using a crude modern sling in this way, the author, flabby and unskilled, has thrown an 8-ounce stone ball to a distance of 60 yards. That's a bit harsh. What did that author ever do to this one? Flabby and unskilled. Do you have to talk about his weight? Sorry, mate. I don't know what this author has against you. I mean, I know he's trying to make a point that somebody's unskilled. You could have just said unskilled. That's hilarious. Of course, a famous image here of the portcullis, used as early as the 4th century BC, suspended above a gateway. To a fort or a town, it could be quickly dropped to shut out an enemy. Less easy to obstruct than a hinged door. And we've got here the gateway of a moated fortification, further protected by a drawbridge, which can be raised or lowers. This is the golden dagger found at Hallstatt in 600 to 500 BC. And this is a bronze dagger from Hallstatt. Two stylized human figures decorate the antenna hilt. Wonderfully intricate. Here we have the Celtic anthropomorphic dagger hilts from France, Germany and England respectively. And our Celtic shield boss from Stratford-on-Avon, England, 400 BC. This is a 4-wheeled battering ram in use against the city of Parga from the bronze doors in the palace of Shalmaneser III, 858 to 824 BC. So at least as early as the 4th century BC, a new type of gate was used to close the entrances of the great halls and walls that defended cities. The portcullis, from the Middle French portcullis, basically a sliding gate, is described in a military treatise attributed to Aeneas Tacticus, who recommends that a gate of the strongest timber available overlaid with iron should be suspended above the gateway. Aeneas Tacticus. I wonder, is that where we get the word tactics from? If the body of the enemy rushed in and the defenders wanted to cut them off, they needed only to drop the sliding gate. Tacticus might have added that it was also the quickest gate to close, so by far the most suitable for a confined space where a gate swinging on hinges could be easily obstructed. The gates of Rome were probably reinforced with portcullises when the city was sacked by the Celts in the 4th century. By the succeeding century, when they added Delphi to their victims, the Celts were already recognised by the classical world as a dangerously powerful group of tribes with a linguistic and cultural affinity. Their arms were the sword, a dagger, spear and sling. When they attacked, spurred on by battle cries and trumpets, they carried long oval shields of wood or leather with mounts or facings of bronze. Some wore bronze helmets, others leather caps, and they fought, like much of the rest of barbarian Europe, without the discipline that made the armies of Greece and Rome so powerful. We have here a Roman infantryman approaching the wall of a fortress in a tortoise formation, protecting themselves from missiles by overlapping their shields to form a roof. And a Roman legionary. Their armour is a helmet, a galea or cassis, a cuirass, lorica, a wide protective belt, known as the cingulum militaire, and a shield, scutum. His weapons are 2 javelins, pila, a sword, gladius, and a dagger, bugio. What a wonderful page. It's like I've unearthed the manuscripts of the 12th century, used during the siege of Lisbon in 1147. The long arm was pulled down to engage a locking hook, and the projectile was then loaded into the sling, and then when the hook was released, the heavy weight on the short arm fell, whipping the projectile towards the target. Here we have the catapult. Up here we have two artillerymen winding down the arm against the tension of the skein, and then the slip hook which held the arm down. The cord on the right disengaged the hook and then released the arm. There's the side view of it in action here. The plan view showing the twisted skein and the arm fully wound down this bit. Down. And then the winch used to tension the skein can be seen in position here. And a large winch wheel showing the crowbar. Yes, the amount of tension and the release of that tension must have been tremendous, fired at such a pace. And here we have the ballista. A ballista for throwing stone balls, a plan view of a wheeled ballista for field use. The rear view, shown without a stock. This is the windlass claws, hooked over a cord, prior to being pulled back by the rope of the windlass. And the side view, showing the windlass claws. The trigger as well up here. Hinge the pot for elevating the stock. So it was used to throw heavy arrows or stones, and resembled a very large crossbow, but it had two separate arms, each powered by its own skein. The skeins were tightened by a windlass. So on chapter 2 we have the hilt here of the Childeric sword recovered from his tomb in 1653, enriched with gold and garnets. He was the king of the Franks. The hilt of the sword from a ship grave at Vendel in Sweden. The pommel and guard ornamented with silver and yellow, with an applied talismanic ring in the second half of the 7th century AD. And here we have a sword decorated with gold and garnets on what was probably the cenotaph of King Anna and Sutton Hoo in England. So Gregory the Great revealed a certain pontifical naivety in a letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople in 595 AD. It is the last hour. Pestilence and sword are raging in the world. Nation is rising against nation. The entire fabric of things is being shaken. There had always been disease, and war was a continuing condition. Whichever of Clausewitz's definitions of war one accepts, an act of violence pushed to its utmost bounds, or nothing but a duel on an extensive scale. It had existed for far longer than Gregory's religion. Evidence of its continuity can be found in the way that the weapons and armour used in northern Europe at the close of the Roman occupation formed the basis of the military equipment of the northern peoples during the migration period. Warriors of 400 AD went into action carrying a shield, a two-edged sword, one or two throwing spears, and a thrusting spear. Towards 500 AD, the two-edged sword seems to have gone out of favour with ordinary soldiers and gave way to the fighting knife, which soon developed into a short single-edged sword. Two-edged swords dating from this later period found in Scandinavia are, without exception, of outstanding quality, their hilts richly ornamented with gold, silver, and inland garnets, and among them superb ring-hilted swords, suggesting that between 500 and 700 AD they were the weapons of men of high rank, probably military leaders. To judge by the weapons found in soldiers' graves where they were laid to accompany their owners to Odin's Valhalla or Freya's fortress, a change took place in northern military practice, circa 500 AD. From then on, weapons were suited more to combat between cohesive units than between single warriors. Dr. Frederick Galstad had suggested that the magnificent helmets, body armour, and heavy shields found in the rich Swedish burials at Vendel and Valsgard belonged to a military aristocracy that trained and led these large units. Of course, there was a huge haul from Sutton Hoo in England, of which the film The Dig is based on, if you've seen that on Netflix, I think it is, which was likely the grave or cenotaph of King Armour, and was a treasure trove of Viking riches, tools and weapons. Here we have the outline drawing of the helmet of a 6th century Frankish prince from a grave at Morgan near Cologne in Germany, constructed of gilt bronze plates riveted over iron, and on the frieze are patterns of vines and birds, monsters, human heads. This is a reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo shield. The heavy iron boss was ornamental with gilt bronze and garnets. The gilt bronze mounts and fittings show that diameter was about 33 inches, and a reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo helmet. It's composed of the surviving fragments of tinned and silvered bronze. The eyebrows and lower lips are picked out in garnets. This is a stirrup, another stirrup of iron, probably 7th century AD. And here is a winged spearhead engraved with the arms of Austria and the world's Du Frederick Du Mustry, made for Frederick III before he became emperor in 1439. This is a pattern-welded spearhead of 1000 AD, and the wings at the base of the blade prevented over-deep penetration, which is quite a grim thought, but a practical one. Don't want to get your spear stuck and open for a counter, I suppose. And this is a Franziska, the characteristic Frankish throwing axe, which is from the 6th to 8th centuries AD. The obtuse angle between the head and haft made it easier to throw and put less strain on the socket when the axe hit its target. This is a bronze crossbow lock achieved from the Han Dynasty. So there is a considerable bibliography concerning the origins of the stirrup, which, as the Arab writers testify, was a major advance in the military employment of the horse. German and Hungarian scholars especially have discussed its invention at great length in the context of studies of Avar, Frank and Lombard grave finds of the 6th, 7th and 8th centuries. Although there are more questions to be answered, present archaeological evidence points to the arrival of the stirrup in the West in the early years of the 8th century. Literary confirmation of the evidence of stirrups found in German grave occurs about the same time, and a subtle change in the verbs used by scribes to describe mounting and dismounting. Insulier and desilier are replaced by scandere equos and descendere. The horseman steps in and out of his saddle where he previously leapt. Interesting. I love that about trying to find moments of inception based on subtle changes in language. That's exciting, isn't it? Here, the Viking camp at Trelleborg, Denmark, is probably like when it was built. Viking swordsmiths appear to have learned the art of pattern welding from the Franks. This is the reconstruction of different stages in pattern welding. And a Viking spearhead made by pattern welding heterogeneous iron and steel. This is a Viking sword from 800 AD found in Norway. The blade of this 10th century Viking sword from Lake Sigurdsholm in Sweden is inscribed with the name of its Frankish maker, Ingelry. The hilt is plated with silver, copper and yellow work. A Viking sword found in Cranogin County, Westmeath and Ireland. The pommel and guard are silver plated. The guard is inscribed Hildebert, probably in the name of its neither 10th century Frankish maker. And a 10th century Viking sword found in the River Ritham in England. The hilt is inlaid with geometric patterns in copper and brass, and the blade is inscribed Luthrit. Here we have a bearded axe from the 8th century. And this example here of the Viking broad axes from the 10th or 11th century. Two iron spearheads here where their sockets are enriched with swords were decorated with silver plate. The iron was first roughened with an engraving tool. Then thin silver sheet was hammered onto the roughened surface. Silver wire was then wound around the socket and then hammered, and finally the surface was engraved. We have fortifications here. The White Tower in Her Majesty's Tower of London, or now His Majesty's, was completed about 1097 in the angle of the Thames and the old city wall of London. The Tower of London here is an engraving by George Virtue in 1742, after a survey made by Guillaume Syward and J. Gascoigne in 1597, and a Norman modern Bailey castle from the greatest of all historic embroideries, the Bayeux Tapestry, probably completed before 1082. You see lots of modern Bailey ruins or remnants around the country. To most people, the word Viking conjures up visions of a barbaric tribe which terrorized the length and breadth of Europe for 3 centuries. Men whose violence was reason enough for the eloquent litany, "From the fury of the Northmen, O Lord, deliver us," to ring through countless churches of northern France. For every reference to the beauty of their art, there are a dozen descriptions of their rapacity. Every mention of the grace of their longships is matched by 10 fanciful stories of the crazed cruelty of the berserk, that strange class of warrior psychopaths to whom battle fever, berserk gangir, gave terrifying strength and immunity from fear. The sagas give Odin the credit for their exceptional energy and courage. His own men refused to wear mail coats and fought like mad dogs or wolves, biting their shield rims. They cut down the enemy while neither fire nor iron could make any impression on them. The great numbers of their weapons that have been found, more than 2,000 in Norway alone, confirm that the principal Viking arm was the sword. During the Vendel period, the immediate predecessor of the Viking Age, the sword preferred in the north had a long single-edged blade, but the favourite of the Vikings was usually a broad two-edged blade with a hilt, comprising a crossguard in the lower hilt, flattened grip, and a second crosspiece in the upper hilt surmounted by a pommel. These swords were often weapons of considerable splendour, reflecting the Viking taste for richness and colour in their clothes and other possessions. Snorri Sturluson of the 1179-1241 period illustrates this love of ostentation in his description of Magnus, King of Norway, on a colonising expedition to Ireland in 1103. Magnus, a man of very warlike appearance, wore a helmet, carried a red shield emblazoned with a golden lion, a spear, and at his side a magnificent sword called Legbiter. Its grip of wool was ivory, and the metal parts of its hilt covered with gold. The red silk jacket he wore over his shirt was embroidered front and back with a line in gold silk, but the quality and sophistication of the decoration applied to swords and axes were not allowed to interfere with their effectiveness. Njál's saga, written around 1280, recounts how Skarphedin's axe severed Holgrim's thigh, and when Gunnar swung his sword at Thorkel's neck, the latter's head flew off. Here we have chessmen of walrus ivory found on the Scottish island of Lewis in 1831, which were probably Scandinavian in the 12th century. I love ornate chess pieces. I do actually quite enjoy chess, but I rarely ever get the opportunity to play it, online or otherwise. Maybe one day, when I'm old and grey, I'll invest in an ornate chess piece, have it as the pride of my tiny room, I don't know. A Norman helmet here, forged from a single piece of iron from Moravia in the 11th or 12th century. And this is a mounted Visigoth, armed in a conical helmet and long halberd, wielding a rugged spear. A lugged spear from a manuscript dated 1109. Commentaries on the Apocalypse by St. Peter's. It's a rather dramatic title, isn't it? So part of the funeral achievements of Edward the Black Prince, who died in 1376, hung over his monument in Canterbury Cathedral. His helm, surmounted by the cap of maintenance and the lion crest, his jupon with the royal arms of England and the labels of the Prince of Wales, and his sword, a scabbard of red leather with gilt brass mounts. castles and strategic positions were invaluable to a strong ruler when held by loyal servants, but they could be a source of trouble if they were in the control of disaffected elements. A few were built in the reign of Edward the Confessor, but it wasn't until after the Norman conquest that they spread across England. A description of these forts, shown on the Bayeux Tapestry, was written by Jean de Gourmont around 1130, who tells of the practice followed by the nobles of the plain to the southwest of Calais, but his description would undoubtedly apply to the modern Bailey castles elsewhere in Europe. It is the custom to make a mound of earth as high as possible and dig around it a wide, deep ditch. The area on the top of the mound is enclosed by a palisade of the strongest logs, strengthened by as many towers as the nobles can afford. A citadel or keep inside the enclosure commands the entiring of outer defences. We have there a bassinet with its original aventail of mail from Cherbourg, Milanese, bequeathed to the Tower Armories in London by Archibald Lisle in memory of 2 sons killed in the Second World War. For details of the sort of armour and weapons carried and worn at the Battle of Hastings and throughout most of Europe for another century or more, the Bayeux Tapestry is the most significant single source of information. Horse and foot alike are shown wearing knee-high hauberks of mail. Some of the horsemen also wear mail chasses to protect their legs. Close-fitting coifs of mail or fabric usually appear worn under helmets, which have a protective extension over the nose, and a few seem to have neck guards. The helmets in the tapestry look as though they were constructed of segments and bands, a very ancient form that was known in the 3rd century AD. Others were made in one piece, with their nasal defence forged in one with the skull. Around the middle of the 12th century, sometime before 1150, a fabric shirt, the surcoat, coat armour or coat d'armour, was first worn over the armour. It was suggested that the surcoat was first created as a means of displaying heraldic devices. Other authorities have claimed with equal absence of firm evidence that the surcoat was intended to keep armour dry, or that it was introduced in the imitation of the flowing cloaks of the Saracens to protect crusaders from the searing heat of the sun in the Middle East. In the next 300 years, until it went out of fashion in the first quarter of the 15th century, the surcoat underwent many changes of form, fabric, and fullness. Some were close-fitting to the torso, others were quite loose. Some had wrist-length sleeves, and others extended in long flowing cuffs. The most interesting of the very few surviving examples is perhaps that of Edward the Black Prince, richly embroidered with arms. It's preserved with the rest of his funeral achievements: helm, gauntlets, and sword scabbard beside his tomb in Canterbury Cathedral, one of more than 500 English churches that house weapons and armour lodged over tombs as a tribute to the honour and valour of great men. 2 splendid armours were placed in Herlufsholm Church in Denmark for the same reasons. Sir Archibald Lisle's bequest to the Tower Armories in London of the superb bassinet from Schloss Cherbourg in memory of his 2 sons killed in the Second World War follows a tradition that has been largely responsible for the preservation of many medieval helmets that would otherwise have been sold as scrap iron. And with that, I think we will conclude this part and look forward to chapter 3 and have a look at some what looks like siege engines. I hope you've enjoyed this little foray into the lore of arms, and I look forward to having you join me next time.